everybody. Welcome to ABA Inside Track, the podcast that's like reading in your car, but safer. I'm your host, Robert Perry Cruz, and with me as always are my fabulous co-hosts.
Rob, it's me, Diana. What's up?
Hey.
And it's me, Jackie.
Hi.
Hi.
I feel like I'm really low energy. I feel like for the first time, I actually heard a difference in my introductory sound effects.
Yeah, there wasn't a hey everyone.
I don't know what happened. I got really tired all of a sudden, I guess. I don't know. Oh boy. But this isn't a podcast about how tired we all are. This is a podcast about behavior analysis and behavior analytic research, where every week we take a topic from the field and read some relevant research articles. Unless it's this week or last week, in which case we are actually doing something a little bit different because it is the month of September when this is coming out, meaning it's our Supervision September series. Every episode this month is all about the context or the content of supervision of BCBAs or just supervision of others as well. And we decided to do a little supervision book club. It's been a couple years since we've done one of these. So rather than reading an article, we are doing a 2-part episode all on Aubrey Daniels' classic Bringing Out the Best in People book. So if you decided today was the first day you were going to listen to ABA Inside Track, I'm sorry, you have to go download last week's episode, so there's a little bit more context. Though to be honest, you probably could listen to this one just fine, but you might miss some, carryover plot lines from the last episode that are hard to figure out from the context clues. But, we'll see. We'll see how it goes.
Last week we did the bringing out part. This week we'll do the best in people part.
Best people part.
Oh, I feel like that's some sort of like terrible Entertainment Tonight sort of sound like best people this week. Oh, who are the best? It's you, because this person donated money or did something special.
Doing a telethon now? Is that what you're?
No, we're not doing it.
To?
We are not doing a telethon. We're not doing a telethon at all.
Oh, phones are ringing.
Oh,
I hear them.
If you listen to this podcast, we might bring you a giant tote bag, filled with copies of positive reinforcement. But we don't know what they were, which is part of this book, because not always knowing what positive reinforcement for your employees is.
But you should know now because you listened last week.
Yes.
Now you're all up to speed on that.
So assume you listened last week and you learned all about how these basic behavioral principles that we all know and love can be applied to management or a business environment or any type of supervision. Again, nothing new science-wise, but something new in terms of application, which you may not have thought of. And this week, we are going to delve into the second half of the book, which focuses a little bit more on how to use positive reinforcement on a more global scale, and also on some specific ways that behavior analysis can be used in a business sense. But I think when we talk about a business sense, we're really talking about any situation in which somebody is in charge and there's some sort of service or product being delivered, which again, for many of you out there may be ABA services, and you're just trying to look at ways to be a better boss. Because like we talk about a lot, very few of us went to school to run a business and then became a BCBA after the fact. Usually it went the other way around, where we became a BCBA and then found ourselves owning a business that we really felt like at various points probably had no business. We had no business running a business, and we're sort of stuck in that role and trying to learn on the job, which is always so much fun.
You don't have to own a business, but any business that has a managerial structure, you may find yourself managerialing people and not knowing how you got there.
As long as you mean business, you don't have to own that business.
Right.
So when we ended last week's episode, we were talking all about how to use positive reinforcement, or just the idea of positive reinforcement, finding reinforcers for your employees, determining what are sort of the scope of the types of reinforcers you are willing to use. Money's not always going to be the best one. And Daniels, in this next section, lays out a number of ways to, quote unquote, do positive reinforcement. And certainly he talks a lot about common errors, because I think for most folks, this is probably true, if you've worked with families or teachers in the past, when there's a problem and you say, we're going to use positive reinforcement, they roll their eyes and say, it doesn't work. Positive reinforcement doesn't work. And then you have to, hold your tongue and not get into some sort of semantic argument with them. Like, actually, by definition, if it were positive reinforcement, it would have worked. So what you used was something else, because that's probably a bad way to start off any conversation with somebody who'd like to work with you for more than 5 minutes.
Yeah, I think they would just walk away. Right? They'd be like, no.
Unless your goal is like, I need to find the exit. Please tell me where it is. I'll be as pedantic as possible. Some common errors. And again, a lot of them are ones that I kind of liked how Daniel sort of looked at the bosses. His boss examples always feel like the oldest boss, like the old guy who ran the Spacely Sprockets factory on the Jetsons. Like he's like, "What? I sent you a Christmas ham 10 years ago. I use positive reinforcement." One of those common errors of you gave your employees something that they may or may not have wanted, and you did it one time at sort of an arbitrary time of year that had nothing to do with, hey, you completed a project, or hey, you raised your safety quota for the quarter. Sort of, hey, everyone's doing a great job. Here's a gift certificate to a spa. And it's like,
in my town, it was a yearly Christmas ham or turkey that you received as a bonus. But
my dad would get the ham,
right? Mm-hmm. But you always get the turkey or the ham.
Sure.
So it's not like I was like doing the best of my job, and then I got a turkey or a ham.
That's where the phrase "working for the ham" comes from,
right? But
working for the ham.
That's what that is the exact opposite of contingent reinforcement, right?
Right.
Where
it's not performance based
at all, and it's not contingent on anything. And who knows if you want a turkey or a ham, right? It was just that you get to choose one. What if you're a vegetarian or a vegan? Sorry, they didn't have a tofurkey.
Unless your goal was, I just want everyone to recognize I appreciate the fact that you are currently breathing in my office environment. Thanks so much.
Right. We have the anecdote where the woman told him about the pin set that she got, the PEN set, and said it just appeared on my desk one day. I didn't even know who gave it to me. And she was like really resentful of the fact that it was considered supposed to be the reinforcer for her because it was really impersonal. And he kind of stressed that a lot, that if there's no person component of the gift, then it's probably not going to function the way that you want it to.
Yeah. So if you're someone who thinks of positive reinforcement in the workplace as something that happens once and something that should just be given at some time and maybe based on a holiday that maybe not everybody celebrates, you're doing it wrong. You're probably not engaged in delivery of positive reinforcement. I do appreciate how he mentions, Skinner. One of the many times that Skinner comes up in this book, the idea of when you're thinking about learning or getting to competence in basic skills, I think Skinner cited it takes, 50,000 reinforcers to teach basic competence in math skills. So if that is the case and you're looking at your employees and you did it once, that's, you still got like 49,999 reinforcers to deliver. And if you're thinking big, like it's always going to be a ham or a turkey, which A, may not be that great for the person you're giving it to, and B, is kind of expensive to begin with, you're never going to get anywhere. So you sort of have to shift that paradigm, as they say in the business world.
Yeah, another thing that he brings out in this chapter too is that even though we all love money
and ham
and turkey.
We don't all love ham and turkey.
I know. I actually don't love ham.
I don't love ham.
I do love ham.
I don't.
I'm sorry. I've derailed you.
Yeah, you have. But that's okay. We all love money. Money actually may not serve as a potent reinforcer because it's frequently delayed. And so he just brings that out. Just throwing money at people will not make them work harder or better.
Yeah. It should be something that's meaningful. It should have context. It should be contingent on the occurrence of something or the accomplishment of something. And this is one of the reasons he gets into later. The bigger your business is and the less day-to-day interaction you have with sort of your lower level or like entry-level employees, you're probably not doing direct positive reinforcement to those individuals. You're more modeling how to give positive reinforcement to the people working directly under you because you can see them. You can get to that like Hart and Risley 4-to-1 positive reinforcement or praise statement to, potential, punisher or some sort of negative reinforcement statement ratio, which is sort of the gold standard. It doesn't have to be 4-to-1. It's like, don't feel like, oh, I said 4 nice things to you. I better stop and say something nasty just to even it out. You could go 100-to-1 if you really wanted to. It's okay. I did like his suggestion because it's one of those suggestions I feel like I've made in the past and people have scoffed at me and said, that's a dumb suggestion, but it's in a book published by a really prominent person. So I think my suggestion was great, which is actually take a moment to write down or tally your attempts at reinforcement in a day. Because what you might notice is the number is very low and you'll have that nice reactivity of, well, now that I see that it's only 2, I can do better than 2, and you build off of that. But again, it's only an antecedent. That's not necessarily going to change anything. So don't think that that's the solution, writing down how little positive reinforcement I'm delivering. He also makes sure that a lot of businesses, when they try to use positive reinforcement, they think about it in terms of like a contest. Like, oh, if you have the most of something or do the most of some behavior, then you get positive reinforcement. Nobody else does. I think he refers to it as the idea of, when you hire these people for your business or when you're working with these people, why would you want there to be one winner and a bunch of losers unless you really want everyone you hire to be considered a loser at your company? And I can't imagine you're going to get very far if you think of all your employees as mostly losers and like one or two winners. That's a bad system to find yourself in.
Yeah, he talks about feeling the need to place everyone within sort of a standard normative curve, right? So you can only have a few employees who are going to fall into that exemplary range and a few who are going to fall into the needs improvement range, and everyone else is just in the middle. But there's no reason to think that. That's what he was saying, is if you've sought out and gone out of your way to hire the best people, then why are you now placing them only in the average category? Why can't they continue to be exemplary and you can continue to see them as exemplary, right? So if you're set up a system where only the top 2% of people receive whatever the prize is, then you've automatically made it so that 98% of your employees feel like they weren't enough.
I never understand the normal curve in the sense of why you would want to create a normal curve in your environment. You know, I think the normal curve, the idea is more the thought that given enough people, this is sort of the breakdown percentile of what you're going to see in the average population. And there's controversy about whether how accurate the normal curve is. I have to make some people be average. Like, why do you want to make anyone average? You want to make everyone exemplary. And not by faking it, but by setting up systems that allow people to reach and accomplish exemplary goals.
Yeah, I had a professor in college that graded everyone in that way. So you had to fit into the bell curve. So only a few people would get A's or whatever, and everyone else would not. And it was very effective at making you study, right? But it was definitely negatively reinforcing. And it also created competition amongst students in the class. So if you had other students in the class you knew were also vying for the top prize, right? Then it would create animosity between the students, which is exactly what you definitely don't want in an organization when everyone's supposed to be working together towards a common goal.
Yeah. A few other nice rules around the delivery of any sort of positive reinforcement would be don't use employee of the month. He really, really doesn't like employee of the month. Again, for a lot of the same reasons that we all talk about. Nobody knows how you get employee of the month. I think he asked some employee at a business, like, how do you earn employee of the month? And a lot of people will shrug or like be good or do a good job. And then someone had the great, probably accurate answer of like, I don't know, be nice to the people in charge, I guess.
Yeah, be friends with the boss.
If you're making praise statements to people, avoid adding but to the end of them. If you're gonna praise someone, just praise them. If you want to critique someone or give them corrective feedback, just give them corrective feedback. Pick one that is most relevant and then do that one. Mostly it should be the praise statements. He doesn't really like the compliment or the feedback sandwich. We've talked about that in the past. And to some extent, I think the research pointed to is a bit idiosyncratic. Some people do like a compliment sandwich. I personally don't like delivering a compliment sandwich.
I really think it all depends on what the content is.
Yeah.
Right? And the Reed and Parsons that we talked about a while back give a more descriptive example of how you can give feedback that does include positive components and constructive components, but it's more complex than just the feedback sandwich.
It's like an open-faced sandwich when you're doing it. So I'm going to give you like a lot of delicious praise. And then at the bottom is the crummy bread, at the end, the corrective statement about what you should do. But there's so much good stuff before that.
But there also been research that says you should deliver the constructive statement first.
Mm-hmm. Right. And then follow with empathetic statements afterwards.
Yeah. So I guess it's a mixed bag.
Yeah.
We'll leave it at that.
And there's no definitive, that's the way to do it. Unfortunately, there's no just the right answer. All right, so moving on, Daniels talks a lot about the idea of precision management. And again, for those of you who work with, students, you've done this a lot. It's basically just the title for identifying the most salient cusps and trying to reinforce those. And he gets into sort of the difference between precision outcomes and the precision behaviors that lead to those outcomes and calls that pinpointing. So this is important, and I guess to some extent it's important in all cases, but I think it really makes more sense as sort of a business angle in terms of my business, our goal of the business is probably make money, right? That's probably the result you're looking for. There are a lot of ways to make those results. You could cheat on your taxes, you could lie to your accountants, you could do insider trading, and all of those will end up with the result that you wanted, which is I'm now richer than I was before. However, when you then pinpoint what are the behaviors that lead to those results, you may not like what you see. And one of the challenges in at least the business world, and again, true to some extent in other realms, is if you don't think about the behaviors you want to see increase, to lead to the results that you would like to also see increase, you often find yourself reinforcing the wrong things. So like Diana, like you were mentioning, any system you put in place in which there's a lot of competition, you are probably going to be inadvertently reinforcing a lot of more political behaviors, backstabbing behaviors, lying behaviors, because the goal...
Sabotage
of others. Exactly. Because the result is...
passive-aggressive emails.
Yeah, I got to get the number one spot, or I got to sell the most widgets or whatnot. But it wasn't like, oh, and I assume you sold the most widgets because you were the best salesman or because you made the most calls or you were the nicest to your employees. It may have been, oh, I stole all the leads in my business or I specifically sabotaged the sales of the other people. I always think of, have you seen Glengarry Glen Ross? Kind of the early 90s movie?
Yes. I never see anything, so no.
Oh, there's a great scene where Alec Baldwin, it was a scene written for the movie, it was originally a play, but Alec Baldwin comes in and he's telling everyone, first prize for selling the most of something is you get a car. Second prize, set of steak knives. Third prize, you're fired. So the idea that all these guys are like, let's all work together to pool our... No, I mean, everyone's now going to be out for themselves and, potentially is going to sabotage because you don't want to be third place. You don't want to be second place. You want to be first place. And that's usually what I think of when I think of these like internal competitions.
I don't know, do those steak knives cut ham?
They might cut a ham. I also sometimes think of the subprime mortgage crisis as well. When you look at what are the results, like we want to get everyone a house. That's a nice result. How did we do that? Ways.
Look the other way.
Totally great ways. Didn't torpedo the economy across the world for a long period of time. No, it's fine. Don't worry about it. So Daniel suggests, what are the desired results?
I love that point, right? Because you don't think about the behaviors first. It's like backward design when you're teaching a college class, right? Like, what do you want out of it? Figure that out first. And he suggests that you were really specific. Like, what are the results? Not necessarily the behavior. What are the outcomes? And then he said, after you do that, then you can go back to the behavior. And I like that because I think people, especially behavior analysts, may start first with, okay, what are the behaviors?
Yep.
Right? Because that's what we're going to measure. That's what we're going to operationally define. But that might not be as helpful when we need to find outcomes in business.
A good rule he gives to folks who are less familiar with the idea of pinpointing your results, and that is the leave it test. If you can leave it behind when you walk out of your business, that's a result. If you can't, it is not a result. For example, looking at like how long do we prep for an average podcast? That's not a result because that's not anywhere. It's some number, whatever it is. The result is going to be the recording that comes out of it. And then, a result would be the fact that we, have these audio files now. But all the prep work, all the other work we do, that's not a result. Those are the individual behaviors that lead to that result in the end.
Yeah, I love his crappy examples. And we've heard these all, like better communication.
Yeah.
I want better communication. Okay, that sounds great, but doesn't tell us exactly what it is.
Yep.
I want everyone to have better safety awareness. Sounds good, but what does that mean? Right? I want increased teamwork. That's also a great one, right? So what does that actually mean? So I love his crappy examples of pinpointing results because these are very broad. And so I think if you have this broad outcome, great, but then specify what you actually want out of that.
Yeah. I feel like it's like the mediational variable quagmire that you can get caught in.
Quagmire.
Right? Because you're like, but what's going to happen once we have the good teamwork? Or the awareness.
Synergy,
right?
of course.
Right, but how will we
Increased
know
synergy.
when we did it?
Right.
When we accomplished it, right? So there has to be something at the end.
Higher morale, of course, Diane. Come on, these are easy
Not
answers.
to say these aren't valuable, right? But they're trickier to measure.
Yeah.
Right? And when you're thinking about business, there is a bottom line, right? Like that's what makes, I think, this map on so well and that businessmen probably have nice understanding of what Daniels is saying. So they're like, yes, there is a bottom line, right? Like I'm trying to lower my cost for something, or I'm trying to increase my profit or number of widgets made. So it's like really clear in these examples, or it should be, what the end result is that you're trying to get to.
Yeah. So once you've got your results pinpointed, then you go back and pinpoint the needed behaviors. And just like when you're defining any behavior, there needs to be that operational definition. Okay, I have to be looking for something observable. I have to be able to measure it. It has to be something that is reliable. He recommends actually starting to take data on some of these pinpointed behaviors to note, like, are you actually then able to measure these? We talked last week, too, about the idea of are these behaviors that individuals have control over? Because if not, you could put whatever positive reinforcement system you want in place. It's not going to change anything. It has to be behaviors that you want to see increase as well, not just behaviors that if they occur, they may have something to do with, like, this is what I want to see people doing. And it also brings up the Lindsley's kind of the dead man rule. It has to be something active, something that people are doing rather than, something a dead man can do, which is no longer behavior. He then gets into, I thought, interesting conversation about what data would be looked at in performance management, because I never think of it. I just think of, you count behavior. That's typically how we, measure behavior change, is by counting how much change there was. But when you're looking at something bigger like a business result, you're probably going to do some amount of counting, but you're also going to be doing some other types of measurement to see sort of what the results are. Net change to some extent. So some of those things are similar to counting, but there may be other results that you're looking at that aren't going to be counted quite the same way that, say, an individual behavior or individual response would be. And as I put in my notes, at this point in the book, you're like, wow, that's like so many steps. He considers everything that's come up so far sort of the pre-work. Right. This individual pinpointing, that's step one. So you have now, as the boss, as the supervisor, manager, you now know, okay, these are the results. They're observable. I can measure them. These are the behaviors I need to see change, increase, that my employees have control over. And I also know the rules that I'm going to follow in terms of setting up my positive reinforcement system. But you've only completed one step at this whole point.
And you're taking data too.
And yes.
Right? You're taking data. You're not assuming that just because you've outlined these specific behaviors that they're actually producing the outcome you want. So
exactly.
That's a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's what I was about to say. You don't even know if this is going to work.
Right.
Nope. Well, let's get into that now. So then he goes into a whole chapter on just the idea of measurement, which, again, if measurement is something that is new to you, for most of our listeners, it should not be something that is new to you. But certainly if you're working as a supervisor for the first time, you may not think about how much could be measured. You sort of take it for granted, like, I'm talking with people. I can't. How would I measure that? How would I know what I'm looking at here? And again, a lot of times with measurement, it's about finding the systems that the least aversive and that sort of leads to positive reinforcement as quickly as possible and change as quickly as possible so that people continue using that measurement system. So certainly if you're consulting with someone about measurement, give them something that's easy to measure, give them something that they can see a change very quickly. If you pick something like annual growth, you can measure that, but you're not going to see a change in that for a year, 2 years, 3 years. In the meantime, you're asking someone to, like, take my word for it. This is going to be great. You may not get that much time.
Your Christmas bonus is the data point.
Yeah,
you got.
You get one data point. He certainly speaks about trying to use raw data as much as possible. I also liked his idea of how much in business you're probably going to have to move away from count and sometimes move into the idea of judgment or judging, which I never think of because, again, I think very much of if I can't count it, I'm not taking data on it, or I don't want to look at that data. But when we're looking at business models or we're looking at other behaviors that might actually better be described as sort of a collection of various responses, you probably have to have some sort of a system that isn't really counted exactly, but is more anchored to kind of that group of behaviors you'd like to see. He mentions using bars, like a bars model. So behaviorally anchored rating scale, which I didn't remember from reading the book before, but made sense. I think I see these sometimes with like a writing rubric, the idea of it's really hard to be like, well, how many points? Or like, what's the growth in my writing? This writing is like, well, there's so many things in your writing. Your capitals, your syntax, your content. Did you have a strong opening statement? Did you hit a word count? There are lots of behaviors that go into writing a good piece of work, whatever it would be. So it's going to be more about a judgment of, did you get like a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5? Did you sort of hit these types of behaviors? Did you reach sort of around this? So some of them are going to be measured, like you had one opening sentence or you used 10 active verbs, but others are going to be more about, did you have, 3 or more pieces of evidence that you cited in the work you wrote?
Some of those like, did you have, strong transitional statements between your paragraphs? You can objectively describe it, but it might look different each time. So it's hard to say with certainty exactly how you're going to define strong versus not as strong versus weak or zero or none, right? So there is a little bit of judgment that comes into play.
Mm-hmm. I felt he described it very well. I felt after reading that chapter that if you gave me a business and sort of described what it was you wanted to see, I could probably take a good stab at coming up with a bars scale. Or the S is the scale. You know what I mean?
A bar scale. What I like about this too is that if you've developed an appropriate scale, then someone else outside, someone else that's part of your supervisor or supervisees should be able to replicate what you're asking for. So I think that is something that he doesn't necessarily mention, but I think is implied. That's also part of the supervision curriculum, is to make sure that the scales that you're using are accurately depicting what you want to see. So, and that when someone looks at that scale, because scales should be available if someone's being judged on it, right? Then they can, at least not in real life, but model the behaviors that are being asked for in the clinical setting or in the business setting.
Yeah, ideally you'd set up your bars and you'd like trial it, or you'd pilot it with some, fake, like I'm going to role play something and let's all measure it and let's get IOA, and do we agree on what the definition of my strong transition or, my, sunny disposition when greeting an employee. Actually, he does have a nice section where he does go over sort of a checklist that meets that criteria for customer service representatives. Sort of, what are the tasks that should occur? And some of them are very specific and easy to measure. Some of them are more of those like pleasant statements, or did you, appropriately say goodbye to the individual?
Right.
That appropriateness is.
But you could map onto like a parent meeting, right? Or giving an interview, a parent interview. Like those are complex skills, and it's not just straight up, did you say hi and bye and ask all the right questions, right? There's a lot of complexity in the way in which you need to actually determine if your supervisee has done a good, quote unquote, good job on that skill.
So moving on from there, Daniels takes sort of it's not really a detour, but sort of goes into the other part of, our positive reinforcement systems, which is going to be our performance feedback systems. And I do like how he conceptualized the idea of performance feedback, even though I think we always talk about performance feedback as part of, say, like behavior skills training. So it's a part of a training process. He very clearly feels that performance feedback is training. That is what it is for. It's for the purpose of teaching new skills. It's sort of that antecedent for change. Hopefully over time it becomes like an SD. Like when I give you this performance feedback, you should see this as a good thing because it's exactly pinpointing for you. Hey, you should do the following. And then the next time you'll be so excited to do it because it'll be followed by my praise, by our whatever like systems we have in place in our business. But I don't think I ever thought of performance feedback as solely like something that occurred in the context of training. I just it always just sort of happens that way, but I don't think I ever really thought of it directly.
I know in some places that I have worked in my current place of business, that's how we frame performance feedback, as it's a way for us to train new skills and maintain the skills that you already have. So that it's not, we try to take the individual out of it, because a lot of the times when we're working with new supervisees, in our field, ABA, right, there is a ton of feedback. More feedback than you will ever get in your entire life on anything, right? And I think sometimes that's hard for people coming into the field because you've not had that experience of all that continual feedback over and over, and that may not all be positive, right? You did a great job doing this. And so I frame it that way when I'm speaking with my students and with our, the students that we supervise, is that feedback should be part of your training. It's part of a training opportunity. And hopefully that then takes the individual out of it, that it's just a behavior you need to learn or a behavior you need to maintain. So you see less pushback and less resistance when corrective feedback is given.
Mm-hmm. I think Daniel speaks to the same problems that we always speak about anytime we talk about behavior skills training or staff training or pyramidal training or large-scale training. The idea that there's never enough time. It's always a matter of, I hired you to do a job and I need you to do that job. And Daniels really spends a good chunk of time discussing kind of the tragedy of that. Like, these poor people have been hired to do a job that they don't know how to do. And there's this expectation that they'll sort of just learn it. Like, kind of like we learn to walk. Like, it just sort of come. Just stay here in the business long enough and you'll figure out everything you have to do. And I think all of us can probably think of a job we had in which that we really felt that was the expectation. And we just felt stuck. Like, I'm never going to learn what I'm supposed to be doing. I'm never going to be good at this job. I can't get any better because I have no idea what's supposed to be happening. And I'll do things and people will say nice things to me, but it's not contingent, so I'm not learning anything. I'm sort of just, it's like you're in an extinction burst. You just keep doing things. sort of eventually someone yells at you, so you stop doing that one, you find something else to do. And if all of us just sort of took more time to put more performance feedback and to make it an accepted part of any job, then it would take, I think, the sting that usually people think of if they haven't been using it or they're in an environment which doesn't deliver a lot of performance feedback, that idea of, someone's coming to talk to me, it's because I'm in trouble. Or when they tell me how to do something, it's because it's supposed to be some sort of punitive statement, because a lot of those statements have either been paired with punishment or been delivered, other consequences that are somewhat aversive.
Right. How many times have you had to say this if you're dealing with a supervisee? Hey, I want to talk to you later, but it's not bad.
Oh, yeah.
Right? You have to say it
Every time.
every single time, right? You can't just say, hey, I want to, let's catch up. You can't even say that. You have to be like, let's catch up, but it's not bad.
Yeah. Speaking of, I think we talked a lot about supervision contracts last episode. I do love having in the supervision contract very clear rules of this is how we're going to provide feedback for each other, because it's a non-negotiable. So I'm never going to say, hey, I tell you something, it's not bad. The expectation is I'll always tell you something after I come observe or after we meet.
Right.
And sometimes it will be all positive. Sometimes it will be positive with some corrective feedback. Sometimes it will be, a few positive things and maybe 2 corrective feedbacks. But it's very clear what the expectations are and sort of what we want to see. And we always know what the goal is, and that's always set out. Daniel's is really big on trying to use visual graphs, which I appreciate, because, usually when you think about graphs in a business, you're thinking about here are our profits, or here's how we're screwing the consumer. I don't know. I'm more anti-business as life goes on. You'd think I'd go the other way. As I get older, I'd be like, I love business and this is the government. And it's like, not so much. But really looking at the feedback of ongoing performance of employees when you can, get short intervals, have that visual out so that they can see, what they're doing. And again, if you're going to give individual feedback, try to give it in private rather than in public. If you have group performance, that's always something that you can post publicly in Graph, because then everyone can see what's going on. And if you're doing all the other steps that we have talked and will talk about, hey, great. It should always be a positive thing, because they'll see their improvements.
I do love how he made the explicit statement, don't compare your performance. Don't be like, well, you didn't do as great as Sally today.
Right.
So I really appreciate that, because I have seen some supervisors try to make it a challenge, right? But then, just like you said in your class, it goes bad.
Yeah, it's going to end up backfiring. Yeah. I like his example of all of the full-time employees at this organization had their own personal graphs, but they hadn't made them for the part-time employees. And one of the part-time employees came and said, I've been making my own graph for how I'm doing every day. Can you make me one now too? So it was really motivating for them. And he said, if you can make it motivating where people want to see their own graph, then you've got it, right? That's exciting. That's where you want to be.
Yeah. So putting all the pieces together. So now we've got our pinpointed results, our pinpointed behaviors to reach those results. We have a measurement system picked out. We have a plan for providing feedback. We're making sure that we're going to provide some level of positive reinforcement whenever we provide that feedback, as well as when other behaviors, those targeted pinpointed behaviors occur. And then the last step would, of course, be now we evaluate our overall results. Are we seeing better results at the end of whatever system you've put in place and all this extra pinpointing you've done, or not? The nice part about a model like this is it's not just one that you can use directly with employees, but even if you're someone who's supervising multiple individuals who then themselves supervise others, you can still model all of these steps in your own work, because a lot of those behaviors will be the same. A lot of the results that you pinpointed will be the same. And then Daniels even goes into, hey, if you want to really get a good sense of how your results are going, you should be using a graph. And so he goes over the experimental design. He goes over, an AB and ABA graph, and then suggests multiple baseline is probably a nice, easy way for, you in the business world to sort of graph the results of all your pinpointing and your performance management. All right. So with that out of the way, we're going to take a little break. Then we're going to come back and we're going to get a little bit more in-depth into some of these components as they relate to supervision and to management. But first, let's take a break, and then we'll be right back.
Do you want to be a BCBA?
Sure, we all do.
Now you can come to Regis College in Weston, Mass. to get your graduate degree.
Choose from any one of these courses.
Masters of Science in Applied Behavior Analysis.
Masters of Science in Special Education.
Dual degree in Special Ed and ABA.
Or be eligible for your postmaster's certificate.
You can complete your degree and be ready to sit for the exam in 2 years. And our 2017 grads had a 100% pass rate on the BACB exam.
Come enjoy practicum placement support, ethics mini handbooks, PhD level professors, small class sizes, and a service trip to Iceland.
If interested, don't delay. Supplies are limited. Learn more at regiscollege.edu.
Again, that's www.regiscollege.edu, regiscollege.edu. One more time, www.regiscollege.edu. See you there!
And we are back, finishing up our conversation of Aubrey Daniels, bringing out the best in people as part of our Supervision September. But before we get back into the conversation, let's make sure that all of you listeners out there are aware that ABA Inside Track is ACE approved. By listening to the show, you are able to earn 1 learning credit, specifically a supervision learning credit. You just need to finish listening to the show, then go to the website, abainsidetrack.com/get-CEUs, get-CEUS. And you'll need to enter in 2 secret code words. I'm going to give you the first one now. It's raspberry, RASPBERRY. It's a fruit with like all the little bumps, kind of tart. It's got seeds in it. It's also slang when you like blow, you stick your tongue out at someone. I'm not going to do it because then it'll spit all over my microphone. Raspberry. All right. So the next sections of the book really go into, I think, just a hyper focus on how to use positive reinforcement in lots of different ways, and then how to use these techniques in kind of the business sphere in a way that I think, honestly, until I read this book, as a behavior analyst, I never really thought of, because they felt very alien to sort of the work I'm doing day to day, and they felt very much, when I read them, like, oh, this is something that a businessman or woman would do, not something that I would do as just some dude. But let's first start with talking about how we can use positive reinforcement, or looking more at kind of the shaping process in business of using positive reinforcement. And that starts with the idea of setting goals, or how to appropriately set goals.
One thing I was a little bit disappointed in, I know that I shouldn't say that about a book, but I was disappointed that in this part, this specific part about shaping behavior using goals, is that he never mentioned behavioral skills training at all. Mm-hmm. Right? Like, I was just like, when is it coming? When's it coming? When's it coming? And it never came. And
it's kind of in the performance
not really
feedback.
But it's not really.
But
it's
not
right?
explicitly.
No, not explicitly. And I was thinking it was going to be here, right? Because
you made the new version, version 3.
Who knows?
Yeah,
I don't know.
We only have version 2.
This was
Everybody.
2000, so I feel like, it was around, but maybe not quite as formed as an idea,
right,
regarding the phrase.
Yeah, hopefully. Because here, we've all heard about goals. We've all heard about goal setting. It's like ubiquitous in business and in management, right? And one thing I loved is he's like, we all talk about it, but nobody knows what it means, and nobody knows what you're doing. And if you've made a goal, then do you stop? And that's one pinpoint. He said that if someone makes a goal, they reach that goal and then stop responding, then you have a big, huge, clear indicator that negative reinforcement's at play in your company, which is
such a good point.
Yeah, I love that. But I wish here he talks about shaping behavior, right, and reinforcing a successive approximations until you get to that desired behavior that you want. But here I would really love to have a little discussion about behavioral skills training and how do you actually learn those behaviors, right? Mm-hmm. Because shaping, as it is defined, does not teach a new behavior, right? It's behaviors that are already in your repertoire that you then emit and then are reinforced. Mm-hmm. I was a little bit disappointed here, but I think it's okay. I like the ideas that he's bringing out, but if I were going to rewrite this book, here is where I would talk about behavioral skills training to teach those skills that are not in your repertoire.
Mm-hmm. Okay. For the most part, I think this section, it sort of dodged that question and more looked at how do you kind of help individuals set up their own, or not set up their own, but sort of understand what is the positive reinforcement system at play, really going into the history that most of us have with goals in terms of, setting goals. It sounds so aspirational, but in practice is usually more, this is a signal of the bare minimum you need to do to not get in trouble, as opposed to, this is a signal, this is your antecedent of like change. Like, oh, you want to reach this goal because something good is going to happen when you reach that goal. And that setting goals is really a process that you can sort of do at different levels, that is very individualized. He talks about how your top performers and your lowest performers are going to have really easy goals, and how the typical standard of setting a goal is everyone's going to meet this goal. But the problem there is that the top performers are performing way above that. So there's no incentive for them to work harder or do more work. The middle performers will probably do okay with that goal setting. The lowest performers will be like, I can't reach that goal, so what's the point of trying? And they'll just continue on doing exactly what they've been doing. Maybe they'll put a little more effort in so they don't get fired, but that's not the system you're trying to set up. But when you individualize your goal, you can set easy goals for the lowest performers that you then build on. You can set moderate goals for your moderate performers because they probably have the most room for growth. And you can set small goals for your highest performers because if you're like, well, the highest performers should have the highest goals, well, they're probably reaching sort of a ceiling in terms of what they can do in a day. And if you give them some sort of giant goal because whether you're highest performers, again, you're probably more going to put a lot of their behaviors on extinction, or else you're going to be signaling punishment is incoming. So do with that as you will, employees. Maybe you see some of those political or lying, cheating kind of behaviors because you don't want to get in trouble. And the whole goal of setting goals is that they become an antecedent for positive, for the occurrence or the presence of positive reinforcement.
Yeah, I think we as supervisors can also use this at the micro level.
Mm-hmm.
Yes,
you got it.
I said micro machines in my head. At the micro level too is, I know that when you sit down with like a BACB candidate, all right, okay, we have to find the task list. Like, what do you want to accomplish? AKA, what are your goals, for this time that we're together? And I think keeping this in mind, that goals are merely antecedents, and keeping it in mind of, where your supervisee is performing at this present moment may help them to establish appropriate goals for them. And additionally, be modeling appropriate supervision practices for your supervisee. So when they become a supervisor, they're also using where the learner is at right now.
Yeah.
The next chapter I thought was pretty relevant sort of for the times we're currently in. And it was all about the idea of downsizing or right-sizing. And while for the most part, this is not something that I, in a given day, would ever think about as a behavior analyst. When you're thinking about supervision and you're thinking about, especially if you are a behavior analyst who's running a, ABA business, Daniels really gets at the idea that when you are in a position where you have lost so much money, you actually need to downsize the number of employees you have, you've more likely set up really ineffective positive reinforcement systems, or you've set up only negative reinforcement systems. And really what you should be looking at is, I need to make sure that I am giving everyone the right amount of opportunities to complete all of the tasks that need to get done. So it's more about looking at in what he calls right-sizing, the idea of we need to get everyone working effectively and efficiently. So I need to be thinking about my plan for delivering reinforcement. I need to make sure that the individuals understand and have seen me model goal setting so that they feel empowered to set their own goals as well. And also the idea that, we all kind of become our own managers. And if the only person who is acting as a manager, aka the only person who's telling anyone what they should do is you have a business that is never going to be the right size. Because if you have to we talked about this last week, if you have to tell everyone everything they need to do, you probably only need yourself as an employee because you don't have time to tell everyone else in your company what to do.
Or if you're the only source of reinforcement.
Yeah, exactly. So you need to sort of divvy that up. And really, downsizing would only occur in times, unfortunately, like now, where it's really financially our business is in dire straits. We have to cut jobs because we can't stay afloat otherwise. But very rarely is downsizing a step that any business takes. And that downsizing was the best thing we ever did. And now we're richer than ever. Usually what happens is business downsizes, then they downsize again. And then you see them in the what company went bankrupt this year article that seems to be coming out every single week. Because, hey, guess what happened this year? Somebody went bankrupt every single week.
The one caveat that he doesn't mention, which I think he might do in the third edition, but if he doesn't, he probably should, is that right sizing, you have to recognize if you put too much responsibility on a person.
Right.
Right? Because it may feel on the managerial side that, we're being very effective and efficient, but not looking at the outcomes and behaviors that specific person that now has additional responsibility is engaging in. And I think that is something that could lead to a whole chapter, right, on staff burnout and staff turnover, because it might feel great for the managerial team, right? But then if you look lower and lower levels, you may see higher and higher turnover rates because you see more and more, expected of. Even if you're your own manager, right, and you've empowered yourself and you've made your own goals, if there's actually just too much for you to do, then it's more likely that you're going to leave your job. But I did appreciate that he did say that reinforce any sort of improvement from day one. any and all behavior that's improving, right? So that may help mitigate that staff burnout and may help mitigate, right, staff turnover potentially if, your supervisor or your boss at your job sees the amount of work that you're doing, right? And then properly reinforces that behavior to maintain that behavior, hopefully not increase it, right, in the future. But you need to take it slow, right?
And later on, we're kind of sprinkling some of the endpoints in here, but being a good manager, being a good supervisor is not just using these systems, but it's also knowing that when to double down on systems like this. Certainly Daniels talks about the idea of when your business is in trouble, if you're a good manager, you'll say, well, I have the system in place. It is working because I'm measuring sort of the behavior. So I'm starting to get the results I want. So I know to keep going, or else I know how to find out what's not working properly so that I can fix the system or update the system for the current challenges we're in. Whereas the bad manager uses any sort of crisis as a time to, I got to go back to my old negative reinforcement. I'm not yelling enough at everybody. I'm not screaming at people. I'm not firing people. Therefore, I'm not handling this crisis very well. Surprisingly, it seems kind of paradoxical, but when you're in a crisis, you should be delivering more positive reinforcement. Well, you should be finding ways to deliver more positive reinforcement. Don't just start throwing it out willy-nilly.
Here's $1. Here's
you sort of
50 cents.
have to be thinking about, okay, maybe you have your one negative reinforcer statement of like, we're in dire straits. We need to reach some of these goals. Oh, I appreciate how everyone's starting to do that. So, here's my way of doing that. Here's my positive reinforcement system back again, even better than ever. And speaking of sort of those reinforcement systems, or how does a good manager double down on systems, Daniels takes a nice sidebar to crap all over most of the ways that these systems are used. I think, Dinah, you mentioned the definitions or the idea of what's the difference between recognition and reward and an incentive system.
Yeah, so he breaks those three down and he gives a definition of recognition as a symbolic way of showing appreciation for compliments. However, recognition is very often delayed and infrequent in its use. Then he says a reward, we could think of that as a tangible item, but it's not usually tailored to the individual. So really your sort of results may vary depending on how reinforcing that thing is for the individual. And you may end up using it to reinforce the behavior you didn't mean to. And then he talks about incentives, which the idea here is they're like used to induce additional performance. So it could count as recognition or reward, but the term is a little bit amorphous.
Mm-hmm.
Ooh, amorphous, huh?
Yeah.
Look at you.
That's why you want to keep your thesaurus next to you when you do your podcast record. And again, we already talked about some inefficient systems, employee of the month. I think everyone, the research is out. Nobody likes employee of the month systems. They're not pinpointed. It always reminds me of the Simpsons episode where every month at the Springfield power plant, somebody has to get employee of the month. And the only person who hasn't earned it is Homer, who, if you've watched the show, there's really, he's an example of someone, there isn't really anything you can contingently provide reinforcement for him because he's not very good at his job and he doesn't have the qualifications. But again, they've just been cycling through, so someone else gets it every time. And so finally he's like, it's got to be my turn. I'm the only one who hasn't gotten it. And then they give it to this inanimate carbon rod.
I've started actually rewatching The Simpsons.
Oh, on Disney Plus?
Yep.
Send us money, Mickey.
We're doing the collections editions.
Oh, those are good.
Yeah, and I don't want to completely crap all over employee of the month because there is some research that if you do it correctly, right, where you have multiple employees of the month, where you have tiers of employees of the month, if you've specified the behaviors that you're looking for employees of the month, then it could be an effective way to potentially add non-contingent reinforcement or contingent reinforcement into your agency. But by and large, how employee of the month is traditionally run, yeah, it's not great. But there has been some research showing its effectiveness when you're, like Daniels would say, pinpointing the outcome, pinpointing the results, and then having a tiered approach.
Yeah.
Yeah. You could have like gold level performer.
Right.
So everyone that met this certain amount gets recognized. But it still is that delayed recognition.
Yes.
Piece.
Yep.
Yeah. The short time seems to be a big factor. I mean, and we see this in a lot of the research we've done where, they set up lotteries and games. It's not that you can't have some sort of a contest, but the goal is everyone could win. The delay between what behaviors need to occur and the delivery of the consequence needs to be pretty short. Should be somewhat fun. It should be something that everyone kind of sees as positive. And again, if you do enough of these, you probably will have your contest be something people look forward to. And they see, oh, a goal, I'm excited to reach that goal, rather than, oh no, another one of these contests where it's going to be a year before we know who wins and only one person wins and the rest of us are a bunch of losers as far as we're concerned.
And we already probably know who's going to win.
Right.
Yeah.
Me.
Yeah.
Well, actually, Diana probably. Not me.
So Danielle lays out a couple rules. Certainly, when we're using positive reinforcement, it should be daily. Like if you're like, I'll just do a contest every now and again, like you're missing the point. It's that you could do a contest as well as some of the other systems that you put in place. It's something that needs to have a direct relationship between whatever the performance you've already pinpointed. It needs to be clear. Ideally, there's a personal value in all of this. There's some sort of recognition. So again, if you don't have a good relationship with the people you work with, you won't be able to deliver reinforcement very effectively. And again, the higher you go in any organization, the less of a personal relationship you have. So it's great when the CEO comes and says something nice to you, but if like I really worked hard at a contest and then this person I've maybe met once in like my entire career comes over and is like, wow, we're so excited. It probably doesn't have as much of, it's probably not as potent a reinforcer as if it's my direct supervisor who I see every day. Not to say like you're the big boss, you can't praise your employees or deliver, the contest winnings. It's just not going to have the same impact, and just being aware of that.
Unless you totally fangirl your CEO or fanboy your CEO, right? It could happen.
Yeah, it can happen. It's not
it's unlikely.
That be aware of some of the issues.
I'm thinking of the boss in Christmas Vacation.
I am too.
Oh.
I have been waiting to bring it up when he shows up at the house.
Well, that part, but earlier when he's like, oh, we got your Christmas card. He's like, oh, I don't know your name, but hearing good things from you. And he tries to say his name when he says Greaseball instead of Griswold.
Oh, and then the little toady goes, corporate cards, sir. It's like, wow, yikes. Hey, man, it ain't the 80s anymore. You're not going to get away with that type of business practice.
But he didn't get his bonus, and his bonus was
going to build the pool.
He's going to build that pool. Down payment. It was
right?
down payment on the pool.
That's
so let's
true.
pay that pool off. A celebration is always nice when you can do. You don't have to do a celebration for everything, but find times to celebrate your employees and celebrate the work they are doing, not celebrate the business is doing well. Celebrate you folks did X, Y, and Z, and that is why things are going well.
I can't wait for you to celebrate me, Rob, since you're the host and we're the co-host. Technically, you're our supervisor. So
am I your supervisor?
Where's
is that how this works?
Where's our celebration?
Every day.
My Jam of the Month club.
In addition to all of these systems you have in place, one that I really liked, because again, we've talked so much about supervision as sort of a top-down process, which it is. However, are there ways to tap into some of the other systems of reinforcement that exist in your job? Last week we talked about, say, there's, the job itself can be reinforcing, your peers can reinforce you. We've talked a lot about management supervision, which is going to be a fraction of the reinforcement that is probably able to be delivered. And then Daniel sets up this performance matrix, which I don't think he means it to be, but I know all of his reinforcers seem to be golf related because he gives some examples of his own. And it really just sort of weighs someone's job. What are the things that are supposed to get done? And they get weighed with the most points. It's almost like a little point system. And there's a good example of what are the things I should be doing? What are the ones that are most important? They're weighed the heaviest. And they have these great scores based on, what are the sort of the scales. It's another example of that bars that we talked about. And if you engage in them, you have some sort of percentage of time you spent on behavior X, behavior Y, behavior Z in your business, and then you could tie it into contingencies. So you could use it as a supervisory system in terms of it's tied into actually the bonuses you make. It could be tied into promotions at work. Although I kind of like to think of it as more of a self-management system, or that's how I thought about maybe using it as something I'm going to use for myself, and I'll set my own rewards, which is always hard because especially when you get to be an adult, it's really easy to be like, well, I didn't reach my goal, but you know what? It's my money. I'll spend it however I want, and I'll go play my 3 rounds of golf or whatever. But, if you set it up correctly, or you set it up sort of with some help from your supervisor or manager, I could see this performance matrix being like a really great means of keeping track of like, what am I doing? Am I getting the things done? And I encourage everyone to kind of take a look at this example, because it's things like finish that book chapter, read these articles, get this talk ready. And it really is very specific, but covers a lot of what you might do. And, I don't know exactly what Aubrey Daniels' job is. He's like a CEO and consultant. So he's probably got a million things he's got to get done, but he still was able to set up this little matrix for himself, or at least an exemplar matrix.
And the thing that I want to stress here too is that it's going to be really hard to reinforce your own behavior, right? Like you could set it up, but It's very hard because you can just break it, right? So I would recommend, if you have a performance matrix, to do it in conjunction with someone else, either your boss or a colleague or, even your mom, right? It doesn't really matter who else is there, but have them be delivering the reinforcer, because it is very, very easy to break a contract with yourself.
Yeah, outside accountability.
Right. It's very helpful, right? Because I set myself contracts every single week, and I've done these performance matrix, and I'm like, but man, it was a rough week, all these outside variables, and then I just get my reward anyway, right? Which is a chai tea latte.
If you're doing it individually, I'd think of it
Right.
more like a self-monitoring system, which doesn't need to necessarily have like some great thing paired with it. You may still get some results from just self-monitoring. You're right, Jag. I think if it's set up as sort of part of something, I like the idea, that peer system. Like if you have a peer who sort of works with you, or if you have a lower level supervisor, so not the boss of the company, but someone who is like helping you out with, your caseload or your whatever your job is at this hypothetical business, would probably be the stronger setup. But if you wanted to use it just as a means of self-monitoring, you could. But again, it would have slightly different results.
I really liked the idea of having weighted performance components, right, of your job, because it always feels like there's so many different things to do. And I think having gone through something like this at your job and laid it out and said, like, what actually is the most important thing? Like, if I had to pick something, what is it that actually needs to be accomplished, right? Like, I think that assisting the people that you supervise in making that type of structure could be really helpful.
Yeah.
So I liked that.
Yeah.
If you think about that as how academia is tied, right? If you're looking at like a tenure application, it's based on the specific things you have done in the last 5 years, right? But they actually don't tell you which is the most important until you get there. And it changes year to year, unfortunately, right? So that's not a great part. But
So we're winding up at the last section of the book, which just kind of felt like a smorgasbord of like, here's some things that are interesting.
did.
Like, do you want to? And I loved every chapter that he laid out. I was like, oh, this is fascinating. This is fascinating. It didn't feel like it went with the flow of the rest of the book so much. It's like, and here's a bunch of other stuff I know, but it's important. You should know it too.
These are my favorite chapters.
They were the most interesting chapters because I think they really expanded beyond. I think for us especially, it went way beyond sort of this, like the basics of human behavior into like, hey, you ever think about behavior analysis and creativity or managing millennials or Zoomers,
Education.
Education system. Well, the education one, depending on your background, was not quite as different.
when I went into this chapter, I was like, is this an entirely different book? That's how I felt anyway. But I'm glad that it was here. But I was like, I never would have put all of these together in this order.
Yeah.
But I'm glad he did.
Yeah, I don't want to go too much into some of the chapters, like accelerated learning. I feel like we could just do our own episode on accelerated learning and training. But again, it gets to the idea of whatever your training systems are, really should be focusing on the fluency of the basics, because the more your staff can engage fluently and somewhat expertly with the basic behaviors that they need to engage in, the more time they have to engage in the more complex behaviors. And again, if you have a company in which you only want people doing basic things, you probably have a company that is not going to excel. You need a company that both can do basic things and then extrapolate on those behaviors and create new behaviors, which gets into the chapter on creativity, which I thought was so interesting. Just the idea of operationally defining creativity as this sort of mix of like shaping and, finding a way to set up some sort of an extinction burst. So this is the only chapter where Daniels was like, you know what you need to set? Crazy goals. If you ever wanted to set a crazy goal, this is the time, because you need to signal, hey, everybody, this isn't a goal that I expect you to be able to like, oh, I'll just engage in more of what I've already done. Like, I want to set a goal in which it is impossible. Like, I want you to know it's impossible, because only if we come up with some new ideas will we be able to reach some of these new goals. And really looking at how extinction is such a key part of creativity. It's the father of creativity, because our patterns of expected behavior don't work, so we engage in a new behavior. And oh, it just came to me. That's the moment in which you sort of contacted reinforcement again for your new behavior, whatever it is. And also the thing I love too is the idea that creativity is not something that we always want in a job or in facets of our job. If everyone were being creative all the time, they'd be coming up with new systems all the time. And just because you can come up with a new system doesn't mean it's the most efficient system or a system that you want your employees or the people you supervise to continue to engage in over time.
Yeah, and in these chapters, I really valued the chapter on what the executive should do, right? And tried to pull out what I as a supervisor should be doing, right? So in here, he talks about like if you own a company, if you're a supervisor, your mission statement should align with the performance that you want your staff to do in your company. I liked that. I loved that he talked about having guiding principles for your company that align with the mission and then align with the outcomes and then align with the behaviors, right? So it's all like one seamless transition. And I think that would be very exciting to work in a company like that, right? Because if you have that very clear like tie to the mission, that it would be easier to know what you as an employee should have to be doing, right?
There's an anecdote, and I cannot remember the actual source of this anecdote to the point that I'm wondering if I made this anecdote up, which would be great because I love it. I wish I had. I'm pretty sure I read it somewhere. And it was back in the 60s at NASA. And, what was the goal in the 60s in America if you're working at NASA? Get a man on the moon, a manned mission to the moon. You got to beat the Russians to the moon. And they had such a clear mission that if you went up to any employee, so the example they gave is they went up to a janitor and said, "What is your job here?" And the man says, "Oh, I'm putting a man on the moon." Were those the behaviors he was engaging in?
Right.
Was he doing the calculations and all that stuff, like from, Hidden Figures and everything? No, but he was a part of the organization whose mission was to put a man on the moon. And so regardless of the fact that maybe his direct work wasn't going to lead to Apollo 11 landing on the moon, he was engaged in the mission in a way.
Right. That's nice.
When I think of, the somewhat fable of like, American individualism and, American brand of capitalism, I kind of think of that, like the strong mission statement of, come on, everybody, we're doing this together. But I feel like at this point, most people think of it as, if I just give the rousing speech at the company picnic, we're all going to do it. We're going to make all the widgets we need. And as Daniels lays out in his entire book, nope, if that's all you got, it's not going to go very far.
Yeah, and finally, and another thing that I think it's important to note out in that chapter 2 is he reiterates the fact that you can't micromanage, right? And I think that's really hard for a lot of new supervisors and new bosses, right? Because you just want everything done perfectly. He said, don't micromanage, and also understand the matching law, which I think is clever, right?
He's like, he threw the matching law in there,
right, and explained it. He's like, understand the matching law, avoid NCR at all costs, non-contingent reinforcement at all costs, because you're not specifying a civic behavior. He's like, just remember, whatever you're giving them, there's also other things that are happening in the environment that are not job related that could compete with the reinforcer that you're providing. So make sure that you're really observing, monitoring what's going on, and being very specific about the reinforcers that you're delivering. And I thought that was, I just like that. I just really love it.
That's always a good rule of thumb, though. Like, well, think about what, think about the reason. It's like, it goes into your empathetic listening, being a good manager, being a good boss, as well as just being, a good person or being well liked by others.
Yeah. And, when stuff's hitting the fan, do more of that, right? Because that's what's going to work.
We'll do more of all the stuff
do more of other stuff that we talked about. Yeah.
Why is my yelling not working? I have to be louder.
Yeah.
And really, the last chapter in the book speaks to, which I update. Maybe it's updated in the 3rd edition, but I don't have the third. Like we said, we don't have the 3rd edition. And it was the idea of managing the Nintendo generation and beyond. And
the Ninja.
That's me.
I think he's talking about late Gen Xers and millennials when he talks about the Nintendo generation in this chapter.
It's us, people that were born in late 1970s. It's
but you
us.
can still play Nintendo. Nintendo's still a thing.
Yeah, but
That's
they're talking about he's talking about the original Nintendo. The people that were born with Nintendo.
So the people that haven't lived their lives without technology.
Right.
So that would be
Could be
us
it could
to
be
some extent, but I think it would mostly be referring more to like older millennials, like the millennials who are younger than us.
We're on the cusp of millennial anyway.
Yeah, we're sort of in
so
between.
yes, it would be millennials. Just say that.
Yeah. This also, I think, would be relevant for, the Zoomers. So the generation that came after the millennials that is currently, I think, kind of in like starting to graduate from high school or starting to get to the end of high school. And
it seems crazy that we're in with people with high school. That's not true.
no, we're not. No.
Okay. Maybe I
This
just
is the
misheard
Zoomers.
you.
This is the next
Gen X,
generation.
baby.
Oh, okay. I was
the
like,
next-
I could be their moms.
Millennials are now the people who are making up a lot of the workforce.
Okay.
And are like have young children. Zoomers are the next workforce. So the workforce that is coming.
Okay, that
coming up really
helps me
soon.
a little bit.
Yeah. I mentioned last episode, I did get to see Aubrey Daniels talk at Mass Aba one year. And I felt he was so respectful. He talked specifically on that. Someone asked a question. He was so respectful to the idea that new generation of employees should be treated with respect. And we should really be looking at, well, why would maybe their priorities be different than the older generation? And the idea that these principles are going to work, you just might have to use them slightly differently or use them even more, which I thought was great because I'm so used to like, seeing older business people just be like, to kids today, they don't have the same work ethic or they don't care. And that's just so dismissive and rude. He was just so understanding of the fact that, like, no, it's a different learning history.
Yeah,
therefore,
everyone's a product of their history and their environment.
But basically, the challenge with working with new generations is just, well, they had a different background than you did. So he talks about working with sort of our generation of folks in this book. But if you were going to extrapolate to the Zoomers, so folks born in like 97, the oldest of them are now just entering the workforce. I looked this up, and this was on smallbiztrends.com. I didn't do extensive research.
Sounds
And I did a little Wikipedia too. But many of the themes I saw had to do with, since they grew up after 9/11 and they lived in the Great Recession, they actually might find pay to be more important, meaning that you may be able to go back on some of the reinforcement principles. Money may actually be a more potent reinforcer than it, say, was for millennials who were more about having a good home life balance and having work that was meaningful. You may actually be able to use more financial incentives, though I don't think you'd want to throw out all the other types of incentives that were discussed because you're going to go broke if you only ever use money to try to reinforce new behaviors. They certainly appreciate stability. It seems like more face-to-face meetings and honesty and candor are important, which again seems to go very much in line with what Daniels is talking about. Because what's more honest than, hey, these are the things I'd like you to do. When you do them, I'll tell you great job and I'll give you some corrective feedback, but mostly positive praise. And these are the systems that are in place to sort of reward you for engaging in these behaviors. That's what honesty is I set up a contingency and I stick with it. They're also more likely to juggle multiple projects. So again, going back to that performance matrix, it may look very different than, say, it would be for a millennial or for a Gen X or for a baby boomer. Also, according to Wikipedia, they may be much more stressed and depressed, and they're much more interested in finding marketable skills by going to college. So again, the more I think potentially, the more you define the role and how it relates to what needs to be done, they may really want that definition. Like, these are the skills you need to do, and that's what will lead to you being successful and this company being successful, which again was a good idea. This chapter did also lead to the largest error in Daniel's book. He mentions sort of talking about like, when Nintendo was released. He is completely wrong as to when Nintendo Entertainment System was released.
Oh, Rob.
I knew some of these dates off the top of my head. Some of them I had to look. The Nintendo was not available in 1984, which you talked about. 1984 was a special year. It was the year of like the personal computers, and it was the year of like the change, and it was like the book. And it's like, nope. And Nintendo was released. I was like, that is wrong. Nintendo was not released in 1984. It was released in 1983 in Japan. It was released in test markets in New York in 1985, October of 1985. So I'm sorry, Mr. Daniels, you're a little wrong on that one fact, but I will forgive you because the rest of the book was pretty darn good.
I think that sums it up.
That sums it. So the Nintendo Entertainment System was released in 1985. I hope you got that from our podcast. Any other last minute tidbits? We don't usually do a giant dissemination station when we do our book clubs because it's just so much content. But I think this would be a good time to sort of share, one take home point you got either from reading this book for the first time or rereading this book for the second or third time.
My main take home point here was that business, just like working with clients, is very similar, right? That we have to specify outcomes, we have to specify behaviors, we have to use positive reinforcement more than other behavioral principles that we may use other times, like negative reinforcement and punishment. And I think taking a step back, if you're supervising a large group of people and taking emotions out of it and looking really at the antecedents, the behaviors that are occurring, the behaviors that you want to occur, and the consequences that could be happening right now is going to be vital for the success of your business. Ooh.
How about you, Diana?
She can't even go after that because it was too good.
I think building off of what Jackie said, you can't just stumble into success and expect to maintain that success, right? Without proper planning. This, to me, highlights what we already know, which is that the principles of behavior are at play at all times within our lives, right? So it's
not to me. You mean to you?
Yes.
They don't apply to me.
Of course not. Of course not. So whether you know what they are or understand them or not, they're still going to be happening and influencing how your employees are operating and how your company is succeeding or failing. So I love the package that he puts this information in because the book is really digestible and He reiterates the points that need to be taken home for business persons, right? In a understandable way with a lot of great anecdotes. So I think that it's a great entry point for someone who might not know about behavior analysis, but should be invested in it for the sake of their business, right? Learning about the principles of behavior can only help to support and help them to understand better how their company is actually functioning. So it's a good read. And if you wanted to, you could probably give it to like your dad
Or your mom.
and maybe they give you a copy back a few years later inscribed that says, I did it, read it, did it, and got a promotion. Love that.
I suppose you could always put that in your performance matrix of like, read, bringing out the best in people. That's tied to your promotion. I think it just, I don't know. I wonder how that worked for your dad. I guess it was just a matter of like, wow, that looked great what you're doing there. I like that. You should be in charge of more people. I don't know. I guess we'd have to ask your dad.
Probably would have to ask.
We'll do the bonus episode. We're like, what was the business like? What was the factory like at the time? You know, was it laid out quite like that? Or was it just a lot of science? Quality is number one. Well, that brings us to the end of another fun book club, but Supervision September isn't quite over. We've still got one more episode to go. Can you believe it? It's a nice 4 Supervision September month. This is a first year. Yeah, and year.
And that supervision will be all about BACB supervision.
Ooh.
Spoiler.
Well, we hope you enjoyed this deep dive into Aubrey Daniels bringing out the best in people, sort of a nice lens to look at some of the same principles that we talk about every week in a new way. I hope you got some new anecdotes out of it, because I know one of my favorites about this book is I now have new business-related anecdotes that will speak to a much wider swath of people at cocktail parties, which I'm sure they'll still, run away and not want to talk to me about this stuff. But still, better than some of my more, hey, did you hear about this one from the basic research? No one's hear that stuff. They want to hear, real life examples.
I just go to cocktail parties to eat shrimp.
Well, you could do both.
I just don't go to cocktail parties.
No, I don't want to talk to anybody.
Oh, okay. Just want to eat the shrimp. You got on your performance matrix, you got to weigh shrimp eating, small conversation. It's like, I want one to be 99%, one's going to be 1%. And you can figure out which one Diana would weigh there. Well, before we go, I want to make sure everyone gets their last secret code word. It is peppermint. Peppermint. It's a plant, but it makes that delicious flavor and say gums or candies, all sorts of things. Perhaps it's the reinforcer you use. Maybe you've got a desk of peppermints for your employees when they come in, because you're saying, I would like to reinforce you for entering the building with the peppermints.
Reinforcing your behavior.
I'm reinforcing your entering. Your active entering. Congratulations. Peppermint. Well, that brings us to the end of the show. Big thank you to Jackie and Diana for being here. If you have not heard or have not seen on any of our Facebook page, this is our first month where we have a Patreon. By going to patreon.com/ABA Inside Track, you can sign up at the $5, $10, or $20 level. We have all sorts of extra bonuses that we've never had before, including a bi-monthly social meetup. We'll be doing more of these book clubs. Those are going to be exclusive only to Patreons, as well as a lot of other cool things like exclusive merch and discounts at our CE store. So go on over to patreon.com/ABA Inside Track to learn all about what you can sign up for. And we really hope to see you there. Thank you all for listening. If you just want to hear some more of this podcast, well, please feel free to subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher. I got an email. I think we're going to be on Amazon's Audible podcast system that they're doing. I think I was told we were. So that's another way you could listen to us. Please feel free to leave us a review or send us any information you like. You can reach out to us a lot of different ways. Patreon, like I mentioned, there's also through social media. We're everywhere as ABA Inside Track, Facebook, Twitter, Pinterest, and Instagram. You can go to our website, abainsidetrack.com, to find links to all of the articles that are discussed. You can find all of these episodes posted on YouTube with the YouTube subtitling feature. And of course, you can feel free to send us an email at any time at abainsidetrack@gmail.com. I want to make sure to thank Dr. Jim Carr for recording our intro and outro music, Kyle Sturry for his interstitial music, Dan Thabit of the Podcast Doctors for his editing, and Hollis Irvin from Sycamore Workshop for his visual design work. We'll be back next week with one more great Supervision episode, but until then, keep responding. Bye.
Bye.